Episode 61A, the U.S. Army Basic Training and Justice. There are responsibilities and duties that men have just because they are men. One is the protection of women and children. Another is the defense of his nation. In 1960, I enlisted in the United States Army via the National Guard's Yankee Division. The draft was still operating and all men 18 through 35 had a military duty. I signed up for 6 years. That was 6 months active duty and 5.5 years reserve duty. I was not an enthusiastic soldier. My freedom was and is very important to me, and the discipline and lack of freedom required for my Army years wasn't easy, but it was a hell of a lot easier than the wartime soldiers. For years, I never thought of myself as a veteran. I was too young for the Korean War and just missed the Vietnam War. Those patriots fighting, getting wounded, and dying in wars were the veterans in my mind. It took some years before I came to understand that just serving in the military made one a veteran. I did my 8 weeks of basic training at Fort Dix in New Jersey. It was the regional basic training center for Northeast recruits. Many of my fellow recruits were from New York or Jersey, and some from New England. There was not as much to do on weekends at any Army camp. On Saturday afternoon, if we did not get liberty, we would go to the beer hall nearest our company barracks. McGuire Air Force Base is adjacent to Fort Dix. This beer hall was just over the line from McGuire, and some Air Force guys were usually there also. It was a large beer hall and would hold about 200 GIs. One Saturday, a group of us were drinking the 3.5 watered-down beer and getting buzzed anyway, when 4 airborne Rangers carrying duffel bags came in. Airborne GIs received advanced and tougher training than we had and were also parachutists. Rangers were even further combat trained and competed with Marines for being the toughest SOBs in the military, at least in their own minds. This group of Rangers had just gotten off a plane from Germany and showed contempt at this group of beer-drinking recruits as wimps. Close to the door and near the bar were 2 or 3 tables of Brooklyn and Bronx Puerto Rican recruits, speaking Spanish and keeping to themselves peacefully. The Rangers, after 2 or 3 beers, began to loudly challenge the whole beer hall. One of them said, "I can kick the ass of anyone in this fucking hall. Who wants to face me, you bunch of chicken shits?" Everybody avoided them and looked away. Finally, the most arrogant of the Rangers walked over to where the Puerto Ricans were sitting and pulled one guy's arm, calling him a wimp. The Puerto Ricans all stood up. The offending Ranger reached to grab the Puerto Rican again. In a few seconds, all 4 Rangers were on the floor bleeding from serious knife wounds, and the Puerto Ricans had vanished. It happened so fast that no one knew what happened except I knew justice had prevailed. Sputnik University. This happened at my next post, at Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina. This was 3 years after the Russians fired the first spaceship Sputnik into space. There was a lively but dangerous nightclub and bar off base called the Sputnik. It had lots of loose women, booze, and live shit-kicker music. It was about a quarter mile from our barracks, just beyond the fence boundaries of the fort. It was off limits to military personnel because of its nefarious reputation. Sergeant Stans, our platoon sergeant, and a pretty good guy, was winding down his 20 years to retirement. Against the rules, he used to go there some nights during the week. I had been to the off-limits Sputnik on weekend passes, but longed to go there on other nights. Since I had my own room, I could come and go without the grunts knowing about it. I figured out the location nearest the Sputnik, where I could scale the fence and have a ball any night I could get loose. I began to do it a couple of times a week. I enrolled at Sputnik University, and I was taking Dissipation 101. But, you guessed it, my nemesis, Ray L., must have followed me one night and then turned me into the company commander. I received an Article 15, which is a non-judicial hearing for minor discipline offenses by the commanding officer. that would be like court martial light. I was removed from my leadership position as a platoon guide and received KP, which is kitchen police duty. Ray L. was rewarded for ratting me out. He became my replacement as platoon guide. Soon after, through no fault of mine, he was also removed as platoon guide for drunkenness. I often wonder what happened to Ray L. when he got back to Boston. I think nothing good. This is Rod Murphy. Thank you for viewing or listening to my podcast episodes. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, and if you so choose, I ask you to send a good review and or refer a friend who might be interested in this old Boston podcast series. Again, my thanks.